Hey there, intense souls. Welcome back to the channel where subtext is our first language and silence speaks louder than words. Today, we're diving into a dynamic that I know gets your heart racing. You know the type, the one who plans every second of her life versus the one who lives to break every rule. Yeah, that one. This isn't just a story about a college project or a rivalry on the court. It's about what happens when the tension gets so thick you can feel the heat radiating off the other person before you even touch. Get ready. Fasten your seatbelts because the atmosphere in this library and this gym is about to get suffocating. Let's set the scene. The gym was nearly empty when Harper Williams first stepped onto that hardwood floor. Nearly, not quite. There were 3 seniors chatting near the left basket, an assistant coach checking a clipboard on the bench, and leaning against the far wall with the posture of someone who never had to try to be the center of attention, Jessica Crawford. Harper recognized her before she even saw her face. She knew the Letterman jacket, the way she crossed her arms like she was posing for a photo no one asked for, and that slight tilt of the head that said, "I'm sizing you up and I already decided the outcome before you even opened your mouth." Harper had been on campus for 3 weeks. 3 weeks was more than enough time to learn who Jessica Crawford was without an official introduction. Captain of the women's basketball team, 2 years as a starter, a regional trophy in the gym's display case with her number on the plaque, and a reputation that preceded her into every classroom she deigned to enter. Cool in that way that doesn't come from effort, the kind you're born with, like height or eye color. Always surrounded by at least 4 satellites who laughed before she even finished a sentence. Harper had learned early on, long before the transfer, that certain people existed in a different stratum of campus life, and the best strategy was to acknowledge that stratum from a distance and stay out of orbit. Get in, do what needed to be done, get out. Simple. The problem was that what needed to be done today was exactly that: walk into that gym and prove to the coaching staff that she deserved a spot on the team. Harper bounced the ball twice on the floor. Thump, thump, just to hear the sound, to feel the space, to remind herself where she was and what she knew how to do. Jessica pushed off the wall slowly, like someone who had all the time in the world and knew it. "Well, look at that," she said, her voice dripping with the tone of someone sharing an inside joke. The library grew legs. A few seniors smirked. Some of the freshmen looked at the floor, relieved they weren't the target. The assistant coach didn't even look up from her clipboard. Harper didn't answer. She set her feet shoulder-width apart, locked eyes on the far basket, and took the shot. The ball described a clean, perfect arc and snapped through the net without touching the rim. The gym went a second quieter than it was before. Harper didn't smile. She stared down the captain with cold eyes. There was no visible anger in that look. There was something worse: calculated indifference. The coach's whistle blew for the first scrimmage, and it felt like a declaration of war. The tryout lasted 50 minutes. 50 minutes that the coach would later describe to anyone who asked as the most personal scrimmage I've ever seen on selection day. And trust me, I've seen a lot. Harper went hard from the first second. There was no feeling out process, no rookie caution. She played like someone who had already arrived exactly where she needed to be. In their first direct one-on-one, she and Jessica met near the 3-point line. Jessica squared up on defense with her usual confidence, feet apart, knees slightly flexed, eyes locked on her opponent's waist. She'd done this 1,000 times. She could read the move before it happened. She thought it would be easy. Harper was small, and nothing about her suggested she could get past the team captain. But Harper was guarding Jessica with the precision of someone who had studied her opponent. Not because she actually had, she hadn't had the time, but because there was something about the way Jessica played that was readable, almost like handwriting. She tilted her torso a millimeter to the right before pivoting left. She dropped her left elbow right before a mid-range jumper. Tiny tells that most defenses wouldn't catch in the heat of a game, but Harper caught them as naturally as she read a printed page. Harper did something Jessica didn't expect. She stopped dead for a half second, almost imperceptible, as if she was going to drive right, then broke left with a clean, incredibly explosive crossover that left Jessica's feet planted while the rest of her body tried to catch up. The result was inevitable. The captain lost her balance, her knees giving way for a fraction of a second as Harper blew past her, finishing with a smooth layup that felt almost insulting. Harper didn't even look back. She whispered as she headed back on defense, her voice low for only Jessica to hear. "Careful," she said. "Wouldn't want you to roll an ankle, Captain." It wasn't a taunt. It was worse. It was a genuine technical observation, which meant Harper had been paying enough attention to spot a real weakness. Jessica realized it instantly. Her jaw set with a tension she didn't bother to hide. But Jessica Crawford was the star of the team for a reason that went beyond the jacket or the records. From that point on, the tryout became something else entirely. Every time they matched up, it was purposeful, loaded with something that transcended technique or team competition. Harper shadowed Jessica relentlessly, stuck to her like a second skin, anticipating her moves, blocking shots at the last possible millisecond, forcing mistakes that were too obvious for the other players to ignore. There was something personal in the precision of that defense, and everyone in the gym could feel it even if they couldn't name it. What was supposed to be a team scrimmage turned into a private duel. Jessica stopped playing for the team and started playing for the point being Harper Williams and what she represented, which wasn't fully defined yet but clearly needed to be answered on the court before the final whistle. She was good. She was genuinely, undeniably good, and Harper felt it every time they locked up, every battle for a rebound, every second she tried to find space only to find Jessica already there, anticipating, closing the angle. There was a tactical intelligence in her game that didn't match the cool jock image, the effortless laughter, and the orbiting satellites. It was the kind of focus you can't fake. You either have it or you don't. Harper had it. Jessica had it too, and they both knew it about each other now, which made everything much more complicated than it had been 3 hours ago. With the score tied and everyone's legs heavy with fatigue, Jessica caught a pass on the right wing, created space with a step back that Harper recognized a split second too late, and drained a three right in Harper's face, fading away as she shot, the net snapping, a sharp smirk already formed before her feet hit the floor. "Guess knowing my game wasn't enough, Williams." Harper grabbed the ball. She headed up the court without a word. By the end, both were drenched in sweat, their breathing heavy but controlled in that specific way athletes do when they refuse to show exhaustion. The coach checked his clipboard. The result was obvious to anyone watching. As they passed each other heading for the locker room, Jessica tilted her head just enough for only Harper to hear. "Congrats, you made the team. Enjoy the court, Williams. It's the only place you aren't invisible." Harper stopped. She turned her head slowly. She stared Jessica down without blinking, her expression unyielding. "And you're just another girl who needs an audience to feel whole." She turned her back and kept walking. Jessica stood still for 2 seconds. Her smirk had completely vanished. Campus had that specific Wednesday morning quality, people moving a little slower, longer lines at the coffee shops, the air heavy with the midweek slump. Harper was walking through the lecture hall with her folders under her arm when Jessica's shoulder clipped hers with a precision that was anything but accidental. The impact was calculated, hard enough to throw her off balance without being undeniably aggressive. The folders hit the floor, papers scattered across the tiles in a wide arc, research papers mixed with last week's notes, mixed with the outline she'd spent 2 nights organizing. "Oh wow, sorry," Jessica said, not even breaking her stride, her voice sounding like she was commenting on the weather. "You're so tiny, I keep forgetting you exist." Harper knelt down. She gathered the sheets with a tight jaw and controlled breathing, putting them back in order with a precision that cost more than it looked. When she stood up, Jessica was already sitting on the other side of the room with the smile of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and was satisfied with the result. The professor walked in moments later. She was under 30 but carried the presence of someone who had compressed a decade of experience into a time frame most people use to decide what they want to be when they grow up. PhD at 24, a reputation for being the most demanding and most sought-after professor in the department, the kind of combination that usually takes much longer to build. Aaliyah Hartman set her books on the desk, her eyes sweeping the room with the economy of movement of someone who processes massive amounts of information at once. The sound of Aaliyah Hartman's pen against her clipboard was the only metronome in a classroom where the oxygen felt replaced by a thick, almost solid expectation. Aaliyah started reading the list. Every name called was a verdict, a sentence sealing their fates for the coming months. Pair by pair, the announcement was followed by involuntary reactions, looks of relief, shoulders slumping in resignation, or the clicking of annoyed tongues. Harper Williams kept her spine so straight she looked fused to the chair. She didn't look left or right, her eyes were fixed on the chalkboard, a wall of self-discipline that refused to shake. Harper Williams and Jessica Crawford. The silence that followed wasn't a breath, it was the silence of an imminent blast. 25 people held their breath at once, creating a vacuum where the low hum of the AC dared to exist. Jessica let out a laugh, a short, incredulous sound that cut through the air like broken glass, but Harper was on her feet before the echo of the laugh even died. Professor Hartman, Harper's voice was a scalpel, clean, cold, without a shred of hesitation. I'm requesting the opportunity to complete this project individually. I need to optimize my schedule, and I believe my performance will be superior without the dead weight of someone who treats academics like an intermission between practices. The air in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. Jessica stood up in a fluid, almost predatory motion. Her fists were clenched at her sides, indignation rising up her neck in a flush that contrasted with Harper's habitual paleness. The resident provocateur was not about to be attacked first, especially not on her home turf of charisma and presence. I completely agree, Jessica fired back, her voice laced with a sweet venom. I'd prefer isolation over having to endure someone who confuses arrogance with intelligence, giving me orders. I don't need a babysitter, Aaliyah. She paused, a deliberate and slow correction. Professor Hartman. Aaliyah crossed her arms over her chest. Something shifted in the professor's expression. It wasn't the impatience of a teacher dealing with difficult students. It was the look of someone watching a movie she'd already starred in. She saw it right there in that collision of egos, a reflection of a dean's office years ago, of a group project that felt like a punishment and ended up being the most inevitable thing in her life. There was a knowing look on Aaliyah's lips, a tiny smile carrying the weight of secrets Harper and Jessica didn't have the vocabulary for yet.
Interesting, Aaliyah said, and the word vibrated with a subtext the two girls couldn't decode. The answer is no. Collaborating with what you find insufferable is the core of this course, and believe me, it's the lesson that will burn the brightest in your memory when you leave here. Sit down, both of you. The door to the discussion wasn't just closed, it was locked. They both sat. After class, Harper caught Jessica in the hallway with the determination of someone who had already decided what to say. Library. After practice, you're going to do your part and you're going to do it right. Jessica blinked. There was something in that directness that didn't fit the image she'd built of Harper Williams, the quiet girl in the third row, head down, never confronting anything. The person standing there wasn't backing down from anything. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Jessica's mouth. Wow, finally showing some claws, huh, Williams? Fine, I'll show up. I wasn't asking if you wanted to, Crawford. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Harper turned her back before Jessica could respond, leaving behind a trail of citrus perfume and a silent question hanging in the air. Jessica stood still, watching the movement of Harper's shoulders as she walked away. Jessica's smile turned into something more complex, a mix of irritation and a dangerous curiosity that was starting to tingle under her skin. She knew she shouldn't feel sparked, but Harper's resistance was an irresistible invitation to a demolition. The library at 2 in the afternoon had a particular quality, the natural light streaming through the high windows at angles that made the dust motes visible, the central tables mostly occupied by people clearly pretending to study while checking their phones, and that specific scent of old paper and AC that Harper had come to associate with a certain kind of peace. Harper was already there, books stacked on the left, notebook open to the right page, but her attention wasn't on her notes. Near the back window, the silence was inhabited by two figures. Zadie, with her magnetic, calm presence, was leaning over a heavy textbook. Beside her, Min-ji maintained a proximity that defied the laws of casual friendship. Their shoulders touched with a naturalness that exuded an old soul kind of chemistry. Harper watched the way Min-ji looked at Zadie's face while she explained something, a look that lasted a few heartbeats longer than necessary, a smile that was born before the joke was even told. They probably thought they were being discreet. They spoke in low voices, exchanging looks that lingered a second too long. Zadie was pointing at a page, but Min-ji was looking at Zadie's face more than the book, with that specific look of someone who would pretend to concentrate if anyone were actually paying attention. Harper narrowed her eyes, her mind following a twisted path that made perfect sense to her and no one else. "I am absolutely certain that girl is a vampire," Harper murmured, not realizing she'd said it out loud. A heavy backpack slammed onto the chair in front of her with a thud that made two people at the next table look up. "What? Vampire? Wow, Williams, on top of being insufferable, you're delusional, and I already had a long list of flaws for you." Harper blinked. She snapped out of her trance and looked at Jessica with the expression of someone who just realized they'd said something out loud that should have stayed in their head. The irritation of being caught hit her immediately. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," Harper retorted, her voice faltering slightly in her attempt to reclaim her sarcasm. Jessica laughed, a real laugh this time, not a status-seeking or provocative one, but the kind that escapes when something genuinely surprises you. She leaned back in her chair sloppily, elbows on the armrests, looking at Harper with an expression different from her usual one. "It's noon, Williams. Vampires don't exist, and if they did, they wouldn't be out here in the sun in a college library with organizational theory textbooks." Harper's face heated up slightly, not much, but enough to be detectable if anyone was looking. She pulled her notes toward her with an aggressiveness that was clearly a subject change strategy and pushed them across the table toward Jessica. "We should focus on the project. Sit up straight." Jessica settled into her chair, in the exact opposite way she was asked, and started looking at the notes with the expression of someone pretending to read while thinking about something else. "You have a weird energy, you know that? Funny, you never seem to run out of energy on the court. Here, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." "You take care of the regression analysis," Harper said, ignoring the comment and pointing to the specific section she'd marked. "I'll do the initial modeling and the literature review." Jessica took the sheets. She actually read them, not just for show, Harper noticed by the way her eyes moved, pausing at certain points, going back. "You already did the whole thing yourself," Jessica observed, her voice losing its lightness, "without even giving me a chance to mess up. Are you that afraid of losing control?" "I didn't do everything. I just planned how we're going to do it. I know how you work on the court. I inferred the rest." Jessica looked up from the pages. There was something different in her eyes, not the sizing up of someone looking for a weak spot, but the evaluation of someone who found something they weren't expecting and doesn't know what to do with it yet. "If you put half the effort into studying that you do into annoying me," Harper continued without breaking eye contact, "you wouldn't need this grade to keep your GPA up." The silence that followed had texture. Jessica straightened up in her chair. "You think I don't care." It wasn't a question, it was a correction.
"I think you pretend you don't care," Harper replied, and this time her tone was different, less like armor and more like a direct observation. "On the court, you're the most focused person I've ever played against. That doesn't happen by accident. You worked for that. You just act like studying is beneath you because it's easier than admitting you care about more than one thing." Something flickered across Jessica's face too fast to decode. She didn't answer immediately. Their fingers brushed when Jessica pushed the papers back. Neither had realized how much their chairs had migrated during the conversation, the distance between them much smaller than when the session started, and neither pulled away. "Are you always like this?" Jessica murmured, her voice dropping into a different register, less projected, more intimate. "Or is it just with me?" Focus, Harper said. Her breath hitched for a fraction of a second. We're not on the court. Good drive, Jessica said softly, her gaze dropping for a moment to Harper's lips before returning to her eyes. It was either intentional or too accidental to be an accident. You know, you make the exact same face you make when you're daring me to miss a shot. Harper looked down at her notebook. She started writing something. What exactly she couldn't have said if anyone asked. At the back table, Zadie whispered something in Minji's ear. Minji closed her eyes for a second, the expression of someone trying not to smile and losing the battle completely. Jessica Crawford had a problem, and that problem had a name, a last name, and an annoying obsession with colorful highlighters. It took her a few days to admit it to herself because admitting it made it real, and making it real meant having to do something about it. The problem with doing something about it was that she didn't know what to do. That feeling, not knowing what to do, was rare enough to be disorienting on its own. She noticed it when she spent 40 minutes trying to draft a paragraph for the regression analysis and realized at the end she'd rewritten the same sentence 6 times without getting anywhere. She noticed it when, in the hallway between the cafeteria and the science building, her eyes automatically scanned the crowd for a certain pair of scuffed sneakers, and she noticed herself doing it, standing frozen in the middle of the hall for 2 seconds processing the fact that she'd done it. She noticed it when she missed 3 consecutive free throws in Thursday's practice because mid-shot, she'd remembered the way Harper almost smiled when she made a lame joke in the library, and that memory had hijacked her entire focus. Harper Williams was irritating in ways Jessica couldn't adequately categorize. Too honest in the worst way possible, the kind of honesty that isn't trying to hurt but does anyway because the truth is real. Too serious, too present in the sense that she occupied a disproportionate amount of mental space compared to the time they'd actually spent together. Why did her chest tighten when she remembered their fingers brushing on the table? Why was that whispered, good drive still there days later, like a frequency the ear keeps hearing after the sound has stopped? She didn't have answers. She had a team to lead, a scrimmage on Friday, and a major project to turn in. The gym on Friday afternoon had that specific smell of inevitable effort, starters versus bench and rookies, a format everyone on the team knew was less about practice and more about establishing the hierarchy. The problem was that Harper Williams clearly hadn't gotten the memo, or she'd decided it didn't apply to her. It was personal from the first whistle. Going to hide behind screens the whole game? Jessica taunted, sticking to Harper with a proximity that was technically within the rules, but clearly testing what was about basketball and what was about something else. She pivoted, her shoulder bumping hard into Jessica's in a contact that refs would call physical but acceptable. She caught the pass and drove. Your base is too wide when you're trying to force pressure. You get predictable when you're trying to intimidate. Jessica growled something the gym noise swallowed up. It was on a rebound that everything fell apart. The ball hit the rim with that dry, metallic sound of a shot that isn't going in, and ricocheted at an angle they both identified at the same instant. They both jumped. Their bodies collided in mid-air with a violence neither had calculated. Shoulders, elbows, weight, and momentum in a physics lesson that gave no warning. They fell together. The thud on the hardwood was dull and definitive. Jessica landed with her body over Harper's, her hands instinctively pinning themselves on either side of Harper's face to keep from crushing her with her full weight. The gym continued to exist around them, voices, footsteps, the coach yelling something, but there was a radius of maybe 12 inches around them where time was working differently. Their faces were millimeters apart. Their lips grazed. It wasn't a kiss, it was an accident with the temperature of something that wasn't an accident at all, loaded with everything that had been building since the first shot on tryout day, since their fingers touched on the library table, since every silence that lasted a second too long. They froze. Harper pushed her off, hands flat against Jessica's chest, a clumsy force lacking the precision of all her previous movements. She started, and the words came out without structure, just the urgency to get away. I can't. She stood up awkwardly. She bolted for the locker room hallway without looking at anyone or anything. Jessica stayed on the floor for a heartbeat. Then she got up, and she went after her.
The locker room hallway was empty, the gym sounds muffled by the walls until they were just distant background noise. The fluorescent lights hummed at that constant frequency that made the space feel simultaneously overlit and isolated from the world. Everything seemed to amplify the frantic beat of Harper's heart. She was leaning against the metal lockers, forehead pressed against the cold steel, desperately trying to regain control of her lungs. "Running away again?" Jessica's voice echoed in the hall, heavy with an urgency she wasn't trying to hide anymore. "You shouldn't have come," Harper said without turning around. "And you shouldn't have run like I was a monster." Jessica stopped a few paces away, the heat from her body radiating in the tight space. "You looked at me like what happened out there was a crime, like it was only my fault." Harper finally turned. Her eyes were damp, a mixture of fury and fear that Jessica had never seen. "What happened didn't mean anything," Harper lied, her voice trembling in a way that betrayed every word. Jessica took a step forward, invading Harper's personal space. Her eyes dropped to Harper's lips, which were shaking slightly. "Then why are you shaking, Williams? Why does it look like you're going to fall apart if I take one more step?" "Because I hate how you make me feel," Harper confessed, the sound a tear in the silence. "I hate that you break all my rules without even trying. You think this is easy? I worked for years to build this life, this security, and you show up and destroy everything with one look in a stupid library." "You think I wanted this?" Jessica growled, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "You showed up at that tryout and became the only thing I can see. You're annoying, you're arrogant, and you challenge me in a way no one ever dared. I hate you, Harper." The word hate came out like a sigh, a question, a surrender. "I hate you too," Harper replied, her face inches from hers, their breath occupying the same space. Neither pulled away. Jessica's fingers gave in first, touching the side of Harper's neck at the exact moment Harper's hands gripped the fabric of Jessica's jersey. Bodies pressed together, the heat, the millimeter distance vanishing so slowly it felt intentional, like they were giving each other every chance to change their minds. Neither did. Jessica kissed Harper with force, furious and urgent and loaded with everything that had been dammed up since that first look on the court, since the crossover, since the library table, since every second where hate had been the easiest word to use for something that it wasn't that at all. Harper kissed back with the same intensity, her hands sliding into Jessica's hair, pulling her closer as if trying to fuse their atoms. There was no more hesitation, no more taunting. There was only the physics of anticipation finally resolved in a contact that tasted like salt, warm skin, and the absolute loss of control. The cold metal of the locker against Harper's back was the only thing that still made physical sense in that hallway. The taste of Jessica was still on her lips, a mix of salt, determination, and something terribly sweet she couldn't name. It was the touch of Jessica's finger tracing her jawline with agonizing slowness that made the first real crack appear in the wall Harper had spent years building. She knew she should pull away. Every self-preservation instinct, every rule of silence she'd imposed on herself since arriving on campus screamed at her to take back control. But control was an illusion when Jessica's breath hit the curve of her neck, warm and erratic, dismantling all logic. Jessica pulled back just a few inches, enough for their eyes to meet. The mask of the untouchable captain was gone. There was a hunger there, a vulnerability Harper never expected to see in the girl who seemed to have the world at her feet. The silence in the hallway was heavy, charged with the promise of something that would change everything. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to shut you up," Jessica whispered, her voice husky, almost a secret shared between skin and air. Harper felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild rhythm she couldn't hide. She wanted to say something cutting, something to restore a safe distance, but the words died before they were born. Instead, her hand moved up, hesitant fingers finding the nape of Jessica's neck, feeling the heat of her skin millimeters before the actual contact. It was a danger she didn't want to avoid. But then the sound of voices from the gym broke the spell. The outside world was coming back, and with it the reality of who they were supposed to be. Harper pulled away abruptly. The movement was sharp, almost violent in its need for separation. She straightened her jersey with hands that still insisted on shaking, refusing to look at Jessica. "This doesn't change anything," Harper said, but her voice failed at the end, betraying the lie. "It changes everything, Williams, and you know it." Jessica didn't try to stop her when Harper nearly ran down the hall, but her gaze stayed fixed on Harper's back, a debt of tension they both knew would eventually have to be paid. The days that followed had the specific texture of something irreversible trying to pretend it was normal. In practice, they were efficient and distant, their language reduced to passes and tactical positioning. Harper arrived early, left early, and convinced herself the kiss was adrenaline and bad judgment and nothing more. But then Jessica would show up at the library with the regression analysis draft, done right, no loose ends, not a single opening for criticism, and leave it on the table without a word, and walk away. And Harper would stare at the pages with the nagging feeling that she was being disarmed by someone who had decided to stop using weapons. If you've ever been on that tightrope between what you want and what you should do, you know that what happened next was the beginning of the end. Sometimes the thing we fear most is exactly what makes us feel alive, and the mystery was no longer if they would give in, but who would be the first to break completely under the weight of the secret. The night of the big game against their rivals arrived with a storm that seemed to echo Harper's internal state. The gym was packed, the electricity in the air almost palpable, but for Harper there was only one person on the court. Jessica was leading with a new kind of ferocity, an urgency that seemed to say every point was an answer to something that couldn't be said out loud. In the final quarter, with the score tight, Jessica took a hard foul and went down. The entire gym held its breath. Harper was the first one there. She knelt beside Jessica, ignoring the cameras, the coach, the crowd. "Jess." The words slipped out before Harper could stop it. There was no calculation in the nickname, no conscious decision. It was the name her body chose when her brain stopped filtering. She knelt there, ignoring everyone, and put her hand on Jessica's shoulder with a firmness that wasn't just a teammate's. "Look at me." Jessica opened her eyes, the pain being replaced by something much deeper when she saw Harper's expression. The masks were gone. There was only a visceral concern that could no longer be hidden behind statistics or logic. "I'm okay," Jessica replied, taking Harper's hand to pull herself up. The touch lasted a second longer than necessary. Right there, in front of thousands of people, something unspoken between them was finally sealed. After the win, the locker room was a chaos of celebration, but Harper left early. She needed the cold night air. She was standing under the gym's entrance awning, watching the rain fall in heavy sheets, when she felt the presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of rain and the heat radiating from Jessica were landmarks her body had already memorized. "You can't keep running, Harper. Not after today." Harper closed her eyes, feeling the mist of the rain on her face. The exhaustion of the internal struggle was greater than the exhaustion of the game. "I don't know how to do this," Harper admitted, her voice low. "I don't know how to be what you want me to be." Jessica stepped forward, entering Harper's line of sight. She was soaked, her jersey clinging to her, but her eyes shone with absolute clarity. "I don't want you to be anything other than who you are when no one is looking. I want the girl who looks at shadows in the library and sees mysteries. I want the girl who stares me down without blinking." She reached out but didn't touch. Her fingers hovered millimeters from Harper's cheek, letting her feel the warmth, the anticipation. The moment was so intense the sound of the rain seemed to fade, leaving only the slight tremor in Harper's lips and the dilation of Jessica's pupils under the dim street lamp. "It's dangerous," Harper whispered. "I feel like I'm losing control." "Then lose it," Jessica said, her voice stripped of her usual layers, clean as the air after a storm. "You spend your whole life being the smartest person in the room, and you still haven't realized I'm not here trying to beat you. I'm here because you're the only person who makes me want to play better just to be worthy of sharing the court with you." She didn't look away. "I want you, Harp. I just want you." Jessica pulled Harper into the shadows at the side of the building, away from prying eyes, where the only light came from occasional flashes of lightning. There, the intimacy was total, no more need for words. The afterglow of the victory on the court transformed into something much more personal. Jessica felt the final barrier drop when Harper stepped into her arms, hiding her face in her neck. It wasn't just about physical desire, it was about the recognition of two souls who had found their opposite and their half. The wall of fear had crumbled, and what remained was the raw truth of a connection neither could explain. Harper looked at her for a second. The rain, the dim street lamp, Jessica Crawford completely exposed in front of her without a shred of irony. Harper grabbed her by the collar of her soaked jersey and kissed her without hesitation. There was nothing left to resolve. It was light as a promise and heavy as a sentence. As the rain continued to wash over the campus, they stayed there, wrapped in the silence of the emerging dawn. The tension that had driven them for weeks hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into a promise of something lasting. "Now what?" Harper whispered, her voice husky, her fingers softly tracing Jessica's jaw, a touch that carried a promise of something much deeper than a simple rivalry. Jessica closed her eyes, savoring the shiver Harper's touch sent through her body. She knew the rules had changed. The contract had been signed with their shared breath. "Now," Jessica replied, opening her eyes and meeting the fire in Harper's, "now we play again, but this time you aren't playing against me." Harper smiled. That smile Jessica now knew was reserved only for moments like this. "Not just games, Jess. We still have a project to turn in. But first, I want to show you that I'm not just good at following rules." The big question floating in the air, thick as the smoke of a newly contained fire, is what happens when the girl who never loses control decides that, for the first time, Jessica Crawford is the only rule worth breaking? If you felt that voltage and want to find out what happened when Harper's bedroom door finally closed that night, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. After all, the best stories are the ones that leave us breathless right where the lights go out. Until the next drama.